Real quick, I've got like 5 people texting me on this BYU collective situation.
What does that mean, BYU collective?
So there is going to be a new NIL announcement at BYU soon.
Okay.
We've been hearing about this back a month.
I mean, there's been rumors, yeah.
A major BYU booster. No, when you and I were having a conversation with a major BYU booster who is part of one of their biggest financial supporters.
Yeah, dude's for real.
And he was telling us just how unhappy his company is at BYU.
Yeah.
And that they were trying to get out of their arrangement with BYU. And that they were going to take the money that they were spending on BYU and they were going to put it into the players. And I was telling them about Coug Connect, who hooks us up with Harris LaChance and, all the football players and basketball players. And Coug Connect's a small NIL collective where 99.9% of the money that you give to them goes to the player.
Yeah.
And so we were talking about it, and he's like, yeah, but we're going to start our own collective because BYU does not facilitate NIL collectives. And so I've been going back and forth. The issue at BYU, really quickly before we get to the Pac-12, Pac-10 thing, the issue at BYU is that, again, I will tell you, significant changes are happening as we speak behind the scenes, unrelated to the coaching staff. And what you're seeing is that there is massive dysfunction in mid-level management at BYU administration, massive dysfunction. And part of it is that longtime sponsors, names that you know right off the tip of your tongue, are unhappy. And they don't want to stop supporting BYU football players, but they want to stop supporting the institution. And so that is going to bear out in the form of a new collective being formed.
Man.
And what's going to happen is, and like, I appreciate, by the way, everybody who texts me and reaches out to me and DMs me, I appreciate everybody who does that. Over the last 2 weeks, I've probably got 30 DMs about this particular story. But there is, in my understanding, there is going to be a significant new NIL collective announced in the next few days to a week. And I think they're going to try and change the NIL game at BYU, because as much as we've heard about great NIL deals, the deals have not been great outside of Coug Connect, because I think Coug Connect is the best collective, certainly in the state of Utah. But the NIL deals you hear about have not really benefited the players as they were described. And I think there is some frustration. I mean, like Built Bar, buying scholarships for walk-on players, fantastic. But all these other NIL things you've heard about have not really put money in the players' pockets.
Yeah.
And it's been a huge problem. It's been a huge bone of contention. I talked to a lot of BYU football players who are frustrated with the NIL process in Provo, because a lot of that money doesn't go into the players' pockets. It goes into everybody else's pockets. And I think that's why this collective that's going to be formed is going to be a big deal. And we'll see exactly how this plays out. If it plays out how probably 10 people have told me it will play out, you're going to see a major, major BYU booster put up huge money. And it's going to stop going into the pockets of BYU, and it's going to start going into the pockets of BYU football players.
Yeah, I wonder how that will affect the institution. I mean, we know how it affects players. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. I think we all get that. But I wonder, how BYU as an institution responds to this, if they respond to it, because that, NIL is such a slippery slope for the institution. They have to be really careful with it. But, this is very much a behind closed doors, business dealings type thing, NIL, like topically speaking. And I think, I love the fact that we're getting this news that, they're just going to go straight to player. I think that's brilliant. I think that's how it should be. I just think it takes people getting together, putting their heads together and saying, okay, this is how we're going to set it up. And, Jimmy over here is going to run the collective and make sure the money flows properly. Like, that's what it takes. So I love this. I think it's great. I'm just curious, how does this impact, the mid-level, business management, philosophies and structures and happenings? That's what is interesting.
Yeah, Jeremy says, Monty, have you seen Keenan Peely is in the transfer portal? Yes, we talked about that on the show the other day, and I don't blame him. That's a high-level performer that needs to win football games. And I think BYU is going to struggle in that category this year. But I do think that Utah's NIL games got significantly better this season. I mean, you look at Clark Phillips, you look at America First, you look at,
Cam Rising.
Cam Rising, certainly. You look at the fact that, hey, look at Jaron Hall doing deals where, the guy made, by some reports, $135,000 this past season. So NIL is here, but it's at BYU, I think there is still significant dysfunction.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it's going to take to fix that.
Yeah.
I really don't. You are in a situation where if you don't have NIL dollars to recruit players through the portal, you're not going to win at the highest levels in college football.
Yeah.
You're just not. And I think we talked about this yesterday with quarterbacks. And a lot of people used Cam Rising from Texas, but Cam was never a performer at Texas.
Yeah.
When you have guys like Caleb Williams, who was a Heisman Trophy candidate while on the field at Oklahoma, transferring to USC, that's an NIL deal. That's how those deals happen. So,
yes.
Yeah, exactly right, Greg. Greg Hawkins, good morning to you. They better figure that NIL stuff out quickly because their recruiting is currently something like 65. And they're watching Utah zoom right past BYU.
And that's a fascinating part, isn't it? Like it's not as though Utah is some NIL juggernaut, right? They got better.
But NIL is, but make no mistake about this. NIL at Utah has passed NIL in Provo. The Utah Utes have a better NIL pipeline right now today than BYU does. I think that's inarguable. I don't think you can argue it. I really don't. I think there is more corporate dollars going into the pockets up on the hill than there is in Provo. It must be 5, 6, 7 football players who have voiced frustration to me about the way that BYU limits their NIL opportunities, in their opinion.
Yeah.
And I think that complaining, that's why these happen. But the other thing we got to stop doing is, oh my God, Keenan Peely's in the transfer portal. The program's collapsing. It's not collapsing. BYU does not have a mass exodus of players.
This is a code 10 abort.
This is how college football works now.
Yeah.
There's not a mass exodus from BYU. I think we also need to stop doing that too. Pied Piper says, I love that BYU is incapable of doing something really good without also shooting themselves in the foot. It's really frustrating because BYU had a sprinting head start on NIL.
Yeah.
And it just never materialized. And again, that's why I always point to Coug Connect. Like, you can spend $10 at Coug Connect, and 99% of that money is going into the pocket of a player for T-shirts, interviews, exclusive content, like subscribing. If you're a BYU fan and you don't subscribe at Coug Connect, CougConnect.com. If you don't subscribe to CougConnect.com, you're making a mistake.